Welcome back to the Quiet Maverick. Today's episode is called Faith in the In-Between. I want to talk about what it means to remain orientated when God feels silent, when the outcome has not changed, and when you're left carrying the tension of obedience without visible resolution. Because I think a lot of people know how to trust God when the breakthrough is close. A lot of people know how to trust God when the story wraps up cleanly. But the harder question is this: what do you do when you've already obeyed and you're still waiting? What do you do when you don't feel abandoned, but you also don't feel directed? What do you do when you're not faithless, but you are tired? What do you do when you still believe God is God, but if you're honest, you don't know what He's doing right now? That's the space I want to sit in today, because I think there's a kind of faithfulness that is only visible in the in-between. Not when the prayer is answered, not when the breakthrough arrives, not when the story finally makes sense, but in the stretch where you've already done what you know to do, and the larger picture hasn't resolved yet. I've been sitting with this personally for a while, because I know what it is to move through a season where God gave me wisdom, gave me clarity, gave me enough light to know what faithfulness required. And I followed that light as best as I knew how. I did what I believed was right. I made the costly decision. I remained where I needed to remain until it was time to move. I endured what I needed to endure. And I don't regret that. However, I'd be lying if I said the season after that has become simple. Because sometimes obedience doesn't lead right into a clear resolution. Sometimes it leads into waiting. Sometimes it leads into silence. Sometimes it leads into a season when you're no longer asking, God, what should I do? Because in many ways, you already did what you were asked to do. And now you're left asking a different question. One that is often felt before spoken. How do I remain in a space between obedience and visible resolution? That's what I've been reflecting on. Now, one thing that I've noticed is there is a real difference between disobedience and the in-between. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes we are in chaos because we ignored wisdom. Sometimes we're in confusion because we moved out of alignment. Sometimes we create our own instability because we didn't listen, didn't slow down, didn't govern ourselves well. That happens. But that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about those seasons where, as best as you know how, you did listen. You did move with integrity. You did tell the truth. You did choose obedience over convenience. You did walk away from what wasn't right. You did stay steady under pressure. And instead of immediate clarity, instead of visible reward, instead of a clean conclusion, you got silence. Or at least something that felt a lot more like silence than strategy. You're still here. You're still praying. Still paying attention. Still taking the next faithful step you know to take. And that can be a disorientating place if you don't understand what season you're in. Because if you misread the silence, you can start drawing the wrong conclusions. You can start assuming silence means absence. You can start assuming delay means denial. You can start assuming unresolved means abandoned. And I don't think that's always true. What I'm beginning to understand is that the in-between reveals whether our faith only knows how to function when God is actively narrating every step, or whether our faith can remain orientated when we're being asked to live out what He already said. That's different. And I think that difference matters. Because there are seasons where the next assignment isn't a new instruction. The next assignment is stewardship. The next assignment is endurance. The next assignment is to remain aligned with what God has already made clear, even while you don't yet understand what He's doing with it. I've had to sit with that. Because, if I'm honest, I don't think the hardest seasons are always the dramatic ones. Sometimes, the hardest seasons are the quiet ones. The ones where there's no fresh headline, no obvious movement, no clear resolution, no cinematic breakthrough. Just the daily decision to remain faithful without being able to point to an ending just yet. And I think that's where a lot of people lose heart. Not because they stop believing in God, but because they get tired of carrying a story that hasn't resolved. They get tired of praying into something that hasn't changed. They get tired of holding their posture when there's no immediate evidence that the posture is producing anything. And I understand that because there's a kind of exhaustion that comes when you've done the right thing and you're still living with the consequences of it. Not the consequences of sin, the consequences of obedience, the cost of truth, the cost of integrity, the cost of not capitulating, the cost of remaining aligned when compromise would have been cheaper. The cost is real. And I want to say something carefully here. Faith in the in-between is not pretending everything feels good. It's not denial. It's not spiritual performance. It's not forcing a smile so people think you're doing better than you are. It's not the absence of questions. You can have questions and still be faithful. You can be tired and still faithful. You can be disappointed and still faithful. You can sit in silence and still be faithful. My heart goes to John chapter 11 when I think of Mary, how she sat still. And then when she heard Jesus had come near, she ran to him. She fell at his feet and expressed her disappointment after sitting in silence. See, faithfulness is not measured by whether you have no emotional response. Faithfulness is often measured by what you continue to orientate yourself towards in the middle of the response. I think there's an important distinction here. There's a difference between wrestling with God and dismissing Him. A real difference. See, wrestling says, you know what, God? I don't understand this. I don't like this. I don't know what you're doing right now, but I'm still facing you. Where dismissal says, your voice, it no longer matters to me. Those are not the same thing. And if I'm honest, that distinction has been deeply personal for me because I know what it is to sit in a season where you don't have a neat answer. I know what it is to have more questions than clarity. I know what it is to look around and say, God, I did what I knew to do. I obeyed what I understood. I remained faithful where you told me to remain until it was time to move. And now I'm here. And I don't know what comes next. But even there, even in the wrestle, even in the silence, and even in the fatigue, I still speak to him as someone whose voice matters. And I think that's part of what faithfulness in the in-between looks like. Not certainty, orientation. One thing I've been learning in seasons like this is that faithfulness isn't only about big, visible decisions. Sometimes it's about how you care for yourself in the middle of the strain. How you rest, how you recover, how you make room for your body to come down out of survival mode. And on that note, I want to share something that fits naturally as part of our conversation. This episode is sponsored by Cozy Earth. And if you've listened to the podcast for any length of time, then you know I care a lot about stewardship, rest, and creating a life that isn't built entirely around urgency. Cozy Earth makes luxurious bamboo sheets, pajamas, and bedding designed around comfort, cooling, and better sleep. That's what stood out to me about them. Especially when I hear people talk about the softness and cooling comfort. Especially if you're like me and you run hot. Or if you're trying to create an environment that actually supports recovery at the end of the day. Their bamboo sheets are moisture wicking, incredibly soft, and designed to get softer over time. So I encourage you to check them out. Head to CozyEarth.com and use my promo code SIGNAL8 for 21% off. Again, that's CozyEarth.com with the promo code SIGNAL8 for 21% off. And just for transparency, I do earn a commission when you use my code. So if you choose to do so, you're supporting me and the show. And thank you, Cozy Earth, for supporting this signal and these conversations. I think one of the quiet revelations of the in-between is this. God does not always prove his presence by increasing activity. Sometimes he proves it by sustaining you in the silence without letting you turn away. I'll say that again. Sometimes God does not prove his presence by increasing activity. Sometimes he proves it by sustaining you in the silence without letting you turn away. Because when I look back on certain seasons of my life, I can see there were stretches where I would have preferred instruction, but what I actually got was endurance I would have preferred clarity. But what I was actually given was capacity. I would have preferred movement. But what I was actually given was formation. And the truth is, those are no lesser gifts. They just don't always feel like gifts when you're in the middle of them. There's a kind of faith that only exists after the fireworks, after the breakthrough, after the visible answer. But there's another kind of faith, maybe a deeper one, that is forged when there are no fireworks at all. Just a quiet, costly refusal to let go of the God whose character you've come to trust. Not because your circumstances are easy, not because you figured out everything, not because you've become emotionally numb, but because somewhere in the middle of it all, you've learned this: his silence is not permission to rewrite his character. That line mattered to me because when outcomes stay unresolved long enough, the temptation is to walk away dramatically. Sometimes the temptation is subtler than that. Sometimes the temptation is to slowly reinterpret God through your disappointment, to let delay redefine him, to let pain narrate him, to let exhaustion become theology. I understand why people do it, but I don't think silence gives us permission to assign unfaithfulness to God. Not when his character has already been established in deeper places than our current discomfort. That doesn't remove the ache. That doesn't erase the questions. It doesn't suddenly make the in-between enjoyable. But it keeps the center intact. And sometimes, in a season like this, keeping the center intact is the work. So, what do you do in a season where God feels quiet and the outcome hasn't changed? I don't think the answer is forcing certainty. I don't think the answer is to manufacture momentum just so you can feel like something is happening. I think the work is quieter than that. I think the work is to ask, what has God already made clear that I'm still responsible to steward well? Maybe it's your character. Maybe it's your peace. Maybe it's your rest. Maybe it's your integrity when nobody is clapping for it. Maybe it's the way you speak while you wait. Maybe it's your refusal to let bitterness become your companion. Maybe it's simply continuing to take the next faithful step without demanding the whole staircase reveal itself. Sometimes the in-between is not asking you to become spectacular. It's asking you to remain trustworthy. That lands differently because trustworthiness is quiet work. Ask Joseph in prison. No one applauds in the way they applaud visible success. No one sees most of it. It looks like restraint. It looks like consistency. It looks like prayer when you don't feel dramatic emotion. It looks like choosing honesty over image. It looks like refusing to abandon your values just because the pressure has been extended. It looks like staying orientated. And maybe that's the phrase I'll leave you with today. Stay orientated. If you're in a season where the outcome has not yet changed, if you're in a season where you feel more silence than direction, and if you're in a season where obedience has already cost you something and you're still waiting to understand what God is doing with it, stay orientated. Not because orientation removes pain, but because orientation keeps you from getting lost inside of it. So here's this week's Quiet Maverick challenge. Take 10 or 15 minutes, somewhere quiet, somewhere honest, and ask yourself one question. What am I being asked to steward well in this in-between season? Not 5 things, not 10 things. 1. What's the one area of your life that still belongs to your stewardship, even while the longer outcomes remain unresolved? Maybe it's your rest, your prayer life. Maybe it's your tone or your discipline. Maybe it's your finances. Maybe it's your body. Maybe it's your attention. Whatever it is, name it clearly. And this week, practice faithfulness there. Not dramatically, not performatively, quietly, steadily, honestly. Because sometimes the next faithful step is not solving the whole season. Sometimes it's simply refusing to neglect what's still in your hands. This is the Quiet Maverick. I'm Gregory Michael. If this episode resonated with you, sit with it for a while. Spend some time reflecting on what stood out to you and where this intersects with your own life, your own waiting, and your own faith. If someone came to mind while you were listening, or you know of someone who would benefit from this conversation, share it with them. That's how we keep the signal moving. If you'd like to continue the conversation, you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at It's Gregory Michael. And you can explore more of the Quiet Maverick ecosystem throughout the week. The world is full of noise. Choose Signal.